Hello and welcome to the Gen 10 Theater, and today we're going to do episode 3.5 of Will the Disney Canon and the Legend material coexist? And the reason we're doing a 3.5 episode is because I want to address a discrepancy that I'm finding in my own work in the previous videos, and it's specifically about Rogue One and why I feel like it works, even though technically we had a story about that in the EU. And then we had another story, and then we had another story, and then we had another story. And another story. We had at least 5 stories on how this happened, and none of them are equal to each other. In fact, the original story goes all the way back to 1981, and this is in the audio radio drama of the original movie that took place. Each of the original movies got a radio drama version, and the writer kind of took it upon himself to add things back into the script that was removed from the movie, as well as some original scenes. And one of the scenes that he put in there was the fact that the Death Star plans were found and captured from an Imperial convoy coming on the planet of Tarpwara, which I'm definitely butchering that name, but a group of rebels intercepted those plans and then beamed them off to the Tantive 4 where Leia was, and then she runs off and Vader chases. That's great. That's 1981. And it pretty much stayed that way until they expanded upon it in 1995 in the game Dark Forces, where suddenly Kyle Katarn is the one that led the mission, but he was on the planet of Danuta. And then he finds the plan, just kind of, well, of course it was an old game, but it was just kind of hovering there in a room, and then you take it and you go off and give it to the rebels. But then that was also changed again later, and I believe it was 2006, we got the book Rebel Dawn, where it is said that a rebel agent named Bria was the one who intercepted the convoy and stole the plans, and it wasn't Kyle. But then later on they were saying, well, maybe it was Kyle, and maybe Kyle just said, oh, I have plans, let me take him to Tarpwara, and then Tarpwara, the people there were like, oh, let's beam these off to Princess Leia. It's really confusing, but hey, we have a story from beginning to end, and I guess that counts. But go back a few years, before Dark Forces in 1993, we had the X-Wing games. And in the X-Wing game, there was a mission where you also intercept an Imperial convoy, but it's in space. And your team, now I will admit I have not played the game, so I'm not 100% sure on how the whole thing goes down, but somewhere along the lines, you have the plans in space and you fly them off to Princess Leia on her ship. So now we already have 2 versions, and we're still in the 90s. So going forward, it was the Battlefront games that kept rewriting this story. And in Battlefront 2, which came out in 2005, in one of the missions, you invade the Death Star to go free some people, and on your way out, you just happen to come across Death Star plans, and then you run off with them. The Death Star book that came out later on kind of expanded upon the same mission. So it was almost like they were going with this method, and I believe that book came out in 2008. But going back a couple years from 2008 and 2006, we had another Battlefront game called Lethal Alliance, where you play as Rihanna, who is sent by none other than Kyle Katarn to go find the plans on Danuta. So off she goes, and she gets the plans, and then they realize these aren't the right plans. So how can all these different versions of stealing the Death Star plans coexist with the Rogue One edition of stealing the Death Star plans? Well, there's 2 different ways you can look at it, really. The first easy way is just to throw out everything from the EU, pretty much saying they never really came up with an actual plan, it's just all over the place, none of that really counts. The second way, which is the way that I prefer, is to say that yes, all of that happened. The space mission, the Danuta, the Tarpwara, the Rihanna, they all went after the Death Star plans. And why? Because the Empire would be smart enough to create some decoys. Now, I don't know if it's because of just the amount of Thrawn books I've been reading lately and the idea of how Thrawn had ideas to set up decoys, especially when it came to his cloning facilities, but I kind of feel like the Empire would be at least smart enough to throw out a couple of fake ones. That way, if the rebels came across it, oh, well, that's not the right one. If you look at the one that we got in Rogue One, it was a well-guarded facility inside of a big data container amongst with all kinds of other stuff. It had a special way of accessing it. That version makes more sense to be the official version. So the way I'm looking at it is everything happened. We just had a lot of attempts at decoys, and the Rogue One universe is just the final version of, hey, they finally found it. Which, when you look at it that way, now you have a giant universe surrounding the Rogue One. You have stuff from the EU that just mixes in with that story. And it goes from just being like, oh yeah, of course she was going to find it because, her father built this bit, blah, 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 to, well, everybody was looking for these plans, not that they figured out that there was a Death Star. And because of that, everybody's going to look for him. There was only one real version, and the Empire kind of anticipated that. It really makes the story bigger, which is one of the main things I like about the EU, is it just makes the whole thing bigger. So that's why I made this video, just to kind of explain why I want to keep Rogue One into my perfected canon of both universes at the same time. And it really just helps make a galaxy-sized story. It makes everything make more sense in the long run, even if that's kind of hard to believe. So I hope you enjoyed. Part 4 is going to come out this following Wednesday, which, if you're seeing this in the future, is probably the whole series is already out. I keep putting off the comic one because there's just so much. Like I said, 12 Infinity comics, and there's just one issue from here that will throw the whole thing off. It's been a mess trying to research it. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.